Russia to pay Georgia over 253 million euros for preventing people from crossing freely into the Georgian regions of Abkhazia and South Ossetia, which Moscow recognized as independent after the 2008 war. Now, the European Court of Human Rights has stated that Russia had committed violations including excessive use of force, ill treatment, unlawful detention and unlawful restrictions on day-to-day movement across the administrative boundary line between Georgian-controlled territory and the Russian-backed breakaway Georgian regions as well. Although Moscow quit the European Court of Human Rights in 2022 in the wake of the war with Ukraine, the court maintains that it remains liable for any violations committed before then. With us on the broadcast is Professor Andrew Latham. He is a professor of international relations joining us from Minneapolis. Thank you so much for taking our time and speaking to us on NewsX World. At the outset, I wanted to understand from you how likely is it that Russia will comply with this ruling, considering that it is no longer a member of this court?
I think the chances are close to zero, if not zero. Russia has no incentive to abide by this ruling. As you say, it has withdrawn since 2022, and there's some dispute over whether it's liable or responsible for decisions made prior to its withdrawal. But in any case, given the political temper of the times, there really is no chance. There's no upside to Russia rolling over and accepting this judgment. And there's every upside to saying, we don't recognize your jurisdiction, ECHR, European Court of Human Rights, and we don't agree or concede that we were guilty of any misconduct in that particular war.
Mm-hmm. And I also wanted to understand what kind of precedent then does this ruling set, considering the geopolitical dynamics of the Caucasus region?
Well, I mean, it signals quite clearly that Russia is no longer aspiring to be a deeply or truly European nation in the way that, say, Denmark is or Germany is. It has severed all sorts of ties since the onset of beginning in 2014, but certainly since 2023. And this is just another layer of icing on that particular cake, as it were, signaling once again that Russia does not recognize the authority of the ECHR, especially before 2022. I think this signals an ongoing separation of Russia from Europe.
All right, sir, requesting you to stay on with us as we're tracking further updates, this time from the United Kingdom. The UK spy agency MI5 has issued a stark warning to British lawmakers about increased espionage threats from Russia alongside China and Iran. The UK's domestic spy agency has stated that Russian intelligence operatives are actively targeting politicians through blackmail, phishing and building long-term relationships in order to gather sensitive information. British MPs have been urged to be cautious of online exploitation, travel risks and suspicious financial donations used to gain influence. MI5's alert highlights how Russia continues its long-term campaign to undermine British democracy along other hostile states. This warning comes amid ongoing concerns over foreign interference in UK politics, with MI5 referencing past cases involving covert attempts to manipulate political processes. Still with us on the broadcast is Professor Andrew Latham. Now, interestingly, it's the means that Russia is now using in order to spy on these lawmakers. We are undoubtedly in an era witnessing increased digitization. How significant then is the threat posed by state-sponsored espionage in such a landscape, and can we see this further evolving with the artificial intelligence boom as well?
Yes, I mean, this is not just a British phenomenon. The counterintelligence agency there, MI5, has put its finger on a trend which is worldwide in this era of great power competition. Some have characterized as Cold War 2.0. I think that's going too far, but it rhymes with the first Cold War, except we're now in a digital hypermedia environment where this kind of, on the part of great powers, Russia, China, regional great powers like Iran, all seek to influence consequential governments. And the UK's government is still quite consequential on the world stage, but this is also happening in Canada, the United United States, Germany, Denmark, places like that. What's new is not so much what the Russians and Chinese and Iranians are trying to accomplish, but the modalities or the means in this hypermedia environment, phishing, for example, but also simple ways of approaching members of parliament or representatives in the House of Representatives in the U.S., favorable media coverage, for example. So it's kind of hybrid warfare, but applied to the espionage world. And MI5 is quite right to point out that this is the newest face of a kind of James Bond-like intelligence gathering.
Indeed, and we've also recently seen a high-profile espionage case in the United Kingdom which pertained to allegations of two men passing sensitive information to China. The case collapsed and critics have pointed fingers at the UK government, claiming that the Starmer administration, particularly NSA Jonathan Powell, played a role in this in order to keep Chinese investments in the country secure. Now, Starmer's office has insisted that the decision was made solely by the independent Crown Prosecution Service. Now, in light of this, what sort of balance should then the UK strike in, dealing with espionage activities on one hand, and also its diplomacy with other nations such as Russia and China on the other?
Yeah, this phenomenon, we can call it sharp power. We know what hard power is, guns and bombs, and soft power is leadership and setting an example. But sharp power is manipulation, and that's what's going on here. And MI5 and the counterintelligence agencies across the Western world are right to be concerned, but they have to strike a balance. On the one hand, they need access to Chinese markets, and they purchase a lot of Chinese goods, and a lot of foreign direct investment from China flows into these countries, and they don't want to upset that particular apple cart. On the other hand, they don't want to leave themselves vulnerable to this kind of hybrid warfare, this espionage, this new form of espionage and manipulation, sharp power. So it is about striking a balance. The case against these two people in the UK was kind of weak, but on the other hand, the Starmer government really stepped in and put its thumb on the scales of justice, as it were, in order to not irritate the Chinese unduly. And I think we can debate whether he struck the right balance or the wrong balance, but clearly governments in the Western world have to find some way of navigating these tensions.
All right, sir, requesting you to stay on with us as we are in fact tracking some further updates. Air France has now announced that it will extend the suspension of its flights to Madagascar